Well, I think we'll make a start, everyone. And you probably already heard, but if not, then I can tell you that in the last half an hour, it has been announced from Buckingham Palace that Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has died. And therefore, I propose we begin our meeting with a short moment of quietness, silence, as we remember the Duke of Edinburgh and pay our respects in that way. And we'll minute our minute's silence. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. If you've just joined us and wondered why we were silent, it was because of the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, and we were marking that with a moment of quietness. Thank you. So we welcome various people, members of the Police and Crime panel. I think Councillors Pickering and Peter Short from Rotherham and from Barnsley, Councillor Pickering. I think we've got Councillors Gary Weatherall and Abdul Qayyum from Sheffield City Council. We've had some apologies too. Lauren Poultney and Michelle Buttery, my Chief Executive, and David Hartley's had to give apologies because he's off now for a meeting following on from the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. And I think joining us at some point in the meeting will be Detective Chief Superintendent James Abdi, but not yet at the beginning. Sally, have you got some more for us?
I have it, Commissioner. There is also Fiona Topless, Erica Redfern and Deborah Carrington.
They send apologies?
They've sent apologies, yeah.
Okay. If there are any other apologies or welcomes that we need to add on the minutes, do let Sally know and we'll make sure they're captured in the minutes. So that was item 1, welcome and apologies. Item 2 is just to say, as we all say, that this is being recorded. If you don't want your voice or your visage to appear on the website, then now's the time to depart. And thirdly, in announcements, yes, we do have one announcement, a bittersweet announcement to say that our Chief Constable, Stephen Watson, is leaving us. He's secured the post of the Chief Constable at Greater Manchester. So we wish him very well as he takes up his new appointment, which is not for a little bit yet. And we hope that he'll be able to do for us, I'm sure he will, for Manchester, what he did for us in South Yorkshire, for which we are very grateful indeed. And there'll be time, another time, when we can say more about his time with us. But all the best from the Public Accountability Board, Chief Constable. Item 4 is public questions. We have had a public question from Evan Attard. Sally, I don't think Mr. Attard has asked to join the meeting.
No.
So it was a question around consultation and whether the Commissioner was happy with the amount of consultation that's done. He'd done some maths and worked out that the number of people we'd actually consulted about the precept was some minute fraction of the total population of South Yorkshire, 1.4 million. So I've written him a full answer to that, and you'll be able to see that on the website. I mean, briefly to say, we do have to consult. It's a statutory requirement that all police and crime commissioners consult the public, but how you consult is not really laid down. So each PCC will do it in their own way. We have an online survey. That was what he was querying. 2,600 odd people responded online. We meet people face to face. We've been able to do less of that this year because of coronavirus. So we have had a little bit of that. And I've been at some remote video conferencing type meetings with parish councils and community groups and so on. And we also consult the leaders of the district councils, which we've done. And finally, we have to consult the Police and Crime Panel, and they have to give a view on the precept, the proposal, before I can determine the precept. So there is a fair amount of consultation that goes on, but it's not the kind of scientific results that you'd get from a YouGov poll or the like, but they are very, very expensive to do. And that's the reason why we have to keep our eye on the pennies, because every penny that's spent on that form of consultation would be a penny not spent on policing, of course. So there will be a full answer to Mr. Attard. Item 5, I don't think there are any urgent items. Item 6, I don't think there's anything to be considered in the absence of the press and public. Item 7, are there any declarations of interest that we don't know about? Item 8, then, the minutes of the meeting of the Public Accountability Board held on the 10th of March. They've been circulated. I wondered if we can accept those as a true record of what took place. Everybody happy with those? And that brings us then to matters arising and actions. This is page 11 I think it is, in your pack. And there are just 3 actions. The final 2, 405, 409, they've been discharged. 396, this was around the public space protection order. And I don't know whether Tim is on the line and has any additional information, but as far as I know, that's just ongoing conversations with Sheffield City Council.
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioner. It's quite a timely opportunity to bring that up, because I actually met with Councillor Paul Wood, Dawn Shaw and Simon Verrill with a view to progressing the same this morning. So it's now going to legal services of the council with a view to taking that forward.
Thank you. Well, that was good timing. Thank you very much. So moving then to item 10 on our agenda. This is the force performance report. We, as you know, we go around the districts in turn, and this month we're at Barnsley. If this had been a non-coronavirus type meeting, we might well have been meeting in Barnsley Town Hall. So you have to imagine the setting, the wonderful panels in there, beautiful building, Barnsley Town Hall. We're not there, but hopefully we have Chief Superintendent Sarah Pullman on the line from Barnsley, and she will respond to the questions I've got around the report. So I'm looking at the report, the Barnsley District report. Sarah, we won't invite you to speak on everything, but we'll ask you some questions in our usual fashion as we go through it, various pages. And can I thank you first of all for your usual pellucid report. It's really good, and it's police patois free, if I can say so. It's easily read, easily understood by the public, and that's the kind of thing that we very much welcome. So if I can begin on page 13, and this is under the heading Treating People Fairly, and you talk there in the last but one penultimate paragraph. Finally, in terms of our own staff, the last quarter has been the most challenging period of the pandemic for policing in Barnsley. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that, because demand, I presume, is starting to increase now, or will increase as we come out of the restrictions. And I just wonder how you plan to support staff in that situation, because I know you've had your own issues with the sickness in the Barnsley district.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, if I just look backwards to begin with, and then I'll look forwards for you and cover that last question that you've asked. So just to kind of explain, and I do go into a little bit more detail later on in the report around this issue, but in January, as everybody knows, we had the arrival of the Kent variant of the COVID-19 virus, and it became the most prolific and prevalent variant of the virus very, very quickly. And with that came greater transmissibility. And inevitably, my response teams in particular, who are going out on a daily basis, meeting with multiple people, multiple groups on a daily basis, are therefore far more susceptible to contracting the virus in those circumstances. And whereas in the previous 10 months, we had seen some issues of COVID transmission, in January in particular, 2 or 3 of my response teams were quite severely affected, with 8 to 10 of the officers contracting or being in close contact with people who have been tested positive for COVID-19. So what that meant is that we had to just very rapidly and pragmatically just change our resourcing picture, adapt it on a day-to-day basis, minimising the impact on staff in terms of trying to keeping them on for longer hours, making work rest days, etc., minimising that impact, seeking support from the central COVID team so that we had the resources that we needed to continue to service all elements of policing right across the district. And I'm really pleased to say that we did do that completely uninterrupted, and it's a tribute to the officers themselves, but also the efforts of that coordinated effort right across the force. So that's looking back. It got better through February, and we still have pockets as is inevitable, but we've been in a much stronger position for the last 6 or 8 weeks or so. In terms of moving forward, then, we are clearly anticipating a significant rise in demand. We're already seeing it in the last few weeks as the weather turns and the lighter evenings arrive. And our focus is ensuring that our officers do get the basics around the well-being, that we don't, we make sure when on a very busy shift they are getting breaks, which can sometimes be difficult to fit in, frankly. But we're going back to basics. We're making sure that that's in place. There's messaging, and certainly when I meet with my staff, new student officers, the continual theme that I talk about is well-being, mental health, as well as physical health. And I believe strongly that ethos it resonates around the whole of Barnsley District and helps my staff know that they've got support if they need it. Just need to ask and look out for those early signs in others, and we'll be there to support them and get them through it. So, and then obviously in terms of resourcing the demand increase over the next 3 months, we started work on this in February, so we've been planning for that ever since the Prime Minister kind of announced those key dates. We've been planning our response to that to make sure that we had adequate resources in place for those key dates and the key weekends post those release dates. So again, I'm confident that we will be able to not get through, but make the most of the next few months, enabling the public and our communities to enjoy the relaxation of restrictions, whilst also making sure that we're providing that support and help where it's needed.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Can I take you now to it's probably pages 14, 15 and 16 around domestic abuse. And again, if you could give it a little bit of commentary around that. I mean, I presume that you're expecting domestic abuse to rise as we come out of the restrictions and lockdown, the requests for help from victims of that, though I may be wrong about that. You can tell me about that. But I wondered at the top of page 15, I think it is, or it may be into 16. In fact, it goes on to 17 as well. You talk about the different categories, if I can put it that way, of incident, and I think you have 3 of them. And I wondered if you could say something around that, how that's divided up. Because you talk about a 55%, I think it is, success rate, and I wondered whether that applied across the board for those 3 categories of, is it standard, medium and high? And whether we shouldn't really be looking for a better success rate at the high end of the domestic abuse, if you see what I mean. So if you say a little around that.
I can certainly explain all of that, Commissioner, no problem at all. So what you can see, just in terms of volume, on figure 1, which gives you the graph with crime and non-crime, what you can see there is that we had a dip in April of last year when we were first in the national lockdown. And as we went through the summer months, we saw a rise in domestic abuse crime reported to us. So that does support the theory that it is slightly suppressed during lockdown periods, and then there is a rise later on. However, we need to be careful because there is often some seasonal demand around domestic abuse that occurs more in the summer months, when we have warmer weather and people tend to be drinking more. So there's an element of seasonality here as well as a reaction to the lockdown. So, but in advance of that, knowing that happens on a yearly basis anyway, we have plans in place every year around seasonal increases in domestic abuse. We also have the European Football Championships, which is occurring in June, actually coincides with the final release date around the 21st of June. And so what we're putting in place is a comprehensive plan around domestic abuse. And what that means is making sure that we've got making sure that we're revisiting our repeat victims and giving them the support and signposting through the MATAC process that I've raised a few pages after this. The MATAC process is a multi-agency process that looks at repeat and serial DA perpetrators, making sure that through that process we've identified those key nominals, those key perpetrators, and we're using all opportunities available to us to disrupt them pre this event so that we are able to then minimise and reduce the threat and reduce the harm to our victims throughout the summer months. And that will be an ongoing process. As you know, as I've reported to you on many occasions previously, we have a well-resourced and fully capable DA team here in Barnsley, which deals and owns all high risk, but also deals with prisoners at the medium and standard risk level. And they will be critical to maintaining that resourcing in the DA team will be absolutely critical to getting through the high demand periods, but most importantly, providing victims with that quality service and getting the right outcomes for them. So that's our plan as we move through the next period. So you wanted me to explain those three categories. So it's based on national definitions around high risk, medium risk and standard risk. And what we have here in South Yorkshire is the officer that attends will give that initial rating based on what they've seen, heard, and what the victim has told them, and any previous information that the police officer is aware of. So they do the initial grading, but what we have is a safety net. So through our DARA team, who sit centrally, they will then secondarily review all of each and every one of those DA cases, and they will look broader, wider, in depth to make sure that we've assessed that risk correctly. And there are, I think the statistics are we get it right on the initial officer gets it right on 80 to 90% of occasions, but there are a few that move either between high to medium or medium to high, dependent on that kind of broader picture that is seen through partners and our longer term kind of intelligence picture around these victims and offenders. So high risk is clearly where there is a risk of significant harm, serious harm or injury or death. So it's extremely high risk. And then medium risk is there is a risk of significant harm, but it's conditional, so it's not going to happen immediately. And then standard is self-explanatory. So those are the three key categories that we've been working with for a decade or more, probably even longer than that.
And does that 55% arrest rate, does that apply?
It applies to everything. It applies to everything. So it's an all-encompassing arrest rate across those three categories. But what we have, we do, not in this, I haven't given that detail in the report, but I certainly can in future. What we do here on a monthly basis is break that down. We've got the dashboards, the BI dashboards to enable us to do this quite easily. So we see our arrest rate by category, so by risk category. And what we see...
That would be good to see, because I would expect the high risk to be, high arrest rate.
Commissioner, could I come in?
Tim.
So I think first of all, it's important to emphasise that domestic abuse, the police categorisation of domestic abuse, is a very, very broad. Most of the public would think about partners, intimate partners, violence, stalking, harassment, and absolutely the very high end. High risk domestic abuse involves that sort of offending. But, for example, if we get called to two teenagers squabbling over an Xbox remote control, and we do occasionally, that in itself is classed as a domestic incident. Now, obviously, we don't expect people to make arrests in such cases. What you'll find generally across the board for high risk, it is in excess of 90%. The standard risk, in terms of medium risk, it tends to be about 80%, 75 to 80%. And for standard risk, it's anywhere around 35 to 45%. So there's a very much graduated scale in terms of arrest. We monitor this across all four districts every month, and we do intrusively supervise whether arrests have been made appropriately or not, as the case may be. So we're pretty happy. 55% represents probably whereabouts it should be across the force.
Yeah, no, I get that. Thank you very much. Can I ask you about DVPOs? This is on page 16, Sarah, and I wondered what was happening around that. In particular, if someone breaches the DVPO, what happens next, or what has been happening next?
Well, if they breach the DVPO, they are in breach of a court order, so they go straight before the court. Because the DVPO is an order granted by the court, so it's and they dependent on the court and their decision making thereafter. May I just say something about the arrest rates, Commissioner, just before we move on, if that's okay? It's obviously as Tim has articulated, and I think we're in a really strong position in South Yorkshire. I think we're at the higher end of the positive arrest rate for domestic abuse. But what we've been working on in Barnsley is not just the overall arrest rate, but actually the timeliness of arrest. Because what we know, particularly in domestic abuse, is that if we don't act early and quickly, we lose the victim, because it's an emotional crime, and therefore when the emotions subside, we often find that the victim no longer wants to support or give us the information that we need to pursue. So what we've been doing is, alongside the breakdown of arrest by risk category, we've also been breaking it down in terms of timeliness, and really encouraging our staff to get into that kind of 24-hour period. And what I'm really pleased to say is that when we first started this in January, we were at kind of 84%, so still good, 84% within 3 days. We've pushed that up to 87% within 3 days in February. And in March, which I've just had the figures for, it was at 91%. So it's really being that understanding of why we need to act quickly has been really well cascaded right down to the front line. And they're doing exactly what we want them to do and what victims want us to do in terms of intervening early. So I just wanted to make that point. It's not just the arrest, but the timeliness of the arrest that matters.
No, I get that totally, yes. Is this an area of work which leaves your officers emotionally exhausted? Is it something you have to watch, therefore?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, not only emotionally exhausted, but I think because it does constitute over 30% of our demand, it's one of our biggest demand areas. You need to be really careful that's why that domestic abuse matters training counted so much, is you can get just used to it and it becomes your norm. And actually what we need officers to do, remember, is those case studies in DA matters, those frightening case studies of that longevity of abuse against really vulnerable people, and actually start each case afresh. And you just don't get that even an element of complacency. So I think it is tiring, and we need to constantly reiterate that need just to see each and every victim as an individual. I'm really proud of the fact that across the Barnsley district, but also right across the force, that message has been really well digested in the last few years.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Thank you. Can I take you to page? Sorry, Tim.
I'm just going to add, really, just on the broader case of domestic abuse. I mean, if you look at the journey the force has been on now in terms of our overall arrest rates, the investments in DA teams, the improvements in the use of DVPOs, DVPNs, the volume of Clare's law requests, both right to know and right to ask requests, the investments in a permanent DVPO team within legal services, and the investments in DA matters training. I think it's our view as an executive team, we're in a really strong place with domestic abuse now. And certainly we get lots of other forces coming to look at the journey that we've been on from only a few years ago. Because you will recall, if you wind the clock back to 2015-16, our performance in this area led a lot to be desired. And I think we've gone from that place to a really strong place.
I think that's right. Thank you. I'm on page 18 now, Sarah, if I can. Child exploitation. And I noticed there, this is 3.9. You say you have a robust process, etc. Dedicated child exploitation officer. And I don't know whether this is for you or for Tim, but are there dedicated child exploitation officers in all the districts? Is that a district?
Yeah, yes, there are. There are exploitation officers in each and every district, Commissioner. So, and it's their role to really coordinate to make sure that the partnership is working holistically around the children that are deemed to be at risk. So, and that can be through child sexual exploitation or through criminal exploitation, which obviously we're very much more aware of in the last few years than we have been previously. So county lines drug dealing, OCG involvement with young people. Thank you.
I'm now moving to page 20. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a gallop through the report, but that's it's a time factor. This is under the general heading Crime and Antisocial Behaviour. I'm looking at the paragraph under the graph on the top of page 20, and I think it's 4.2 is the actual paragraph. And you talk in the report about during the times of restrictions and lockdowns, fall in crime generally, but talk about a rise in antisocial behaviour. I wonder whether there was anything more specific around. Is it certain types of ASB? And I mean, one thing that I'm getting a lot of at the moment is emails from people about fly tipping, and I wonder whether that's just that, I don't know. It's certainly from all the districts, but Barnsley included, about fly tipping, whether it's that sort of ASB or whether something else is going on that we ought to know about.
The increase in ASB, so actually, I think, and actually this was articulation in FPG the other day, actually if you extract the COVID breaches, ASB is only up by 3% year on year. So it is quite a small increase when you take out the number of COVID breaches. In particular, in the first couple of months, April, May last year, I think we had a really high number, and we hadn't then disaggregated them from the wider kind of ASB picture. So I think that's probably why we're seeing that increase in ASB. But what the point on page 20 was to say, yes, the COVID breaches are now dropping off. Not entirely, we still get quite a large demand from COVID breaches because people feel quite animated about the fact that they're complying and they see other people not complying, and that still is maintained. But with the change in weather, we've got groups of young people who are now mixing and hanging out on the streets as they normally do. But that then gives rise to the reports of that normal ASB coming back to the fore. And again, there's seasonal demand around ASB as to be expected, and that's what we're beginning to see the rise of in relation to this.
Okay, thank you. Top of page 22, there's a paragraph there. You talk about neighbourhood policing, strengthening of numbers, the uplift and more officers coming through. And you mentioned there the Police Now graduates, fresh-faced Police Now graduates joining the force. And I know we say, well, is there a Police Now person who could come and tell us something about their own experiences? And I think Alice Boucher maybe on the line somewhere?
Hello, Commissioner, yes.
Oh, hello. You're in Carbrook.
Yeah, she sat with us, Commissioner.
Yes.
Bad luck, but anyway, glad to have you with us. I just wonder whether you could say a little bit about your own, who you are, where you come from, what happened to you in terms of your training, and where you are now. Just to give us a flavour of what a Police Now recruit looks like, and you are fresh-faced, which is great.
Thank you. So I joined SYP last July through the Police Now graduate scheme, having completed a psychology degree at the University of York, which I finished in 2018, and I kind of thought about going into policing as a career sort of throughout school and then a bit in sixth form and again at university, but didn't really know sort of the best route for me to do that or how I would do that, and whether it would be something that would be suitable for kind of the skill set that I had at that time. And during my 2 years after university, I was travelling and I was made aware of an article on BBC News talking about police now, which kind of brought to my attention for the first time the concept of neighbourhood policing, which in terms of kind of the community engagement aspect, sort of long-term problem solving, and building and maintaining positive relationships with the communities, that really appealed to me, because I've always enjoyed kind of communicating with people, and kind of always had sort of an innate want to do best by people that I'm kind of surrounded by. So being able to get involved that way did really appeal to me. And then once I was successful, I commenced my training it kind of started in April last year. We were sent Blackstone's textbook and sort of links to online websites to effectively teach ourselves kind of bits of the law, which was then followed up with a 3-week program based on Zoom through Police Now. It's a national scheme, so with other forces as well, kind of speaking about what we'd learned, putting it into context a little bit. And that was done via Zoom due to COVID. But following that, we had 3 weeks then based at the University of Leeds, where we did sort of similar things but in person, so incorporating role play and really putting all the learning that we've done so far into practice. And that concluded in early September last year. And then I began at SYP in the tutor unit at Cliff in Sheffield in September. And so then sorry.
Where are you from originally, Alice?
I'm from Sheffield originally.
You're a local person, because those who go on Police Now are not necessarily sent off.
I think there was about between 10 to sort of apply to any choice.
But now you're in Barnsley.
I'm based in Sheffield at Ecclesfield.
Oh, you are in Sheffield. Okay,
yeah.
And no regrets so far then?
No regrets so far. I'm having a good time. I'm really enjoying it, and it's certainly a lot of learning on the job, but it's at a good pace for me to be able to sort of incorporate the learning that I've had outside of South Yorkshire Police and sort of bring that into what I'm doing now.
And the scheme allows you have 2 years in which you can decide whether you're staying in the force or moving on. Is that a part of the deal? Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. We complete our probation on the neighbourhood teams, and then after that, I think we're sort of free to apply for other roles within the force, or if people sort of decide that actually policing is not for them, then I think it can terminate there. But certainly, I'm enjoying it, so I would hope to be able to stay and continue my career.
Good. Oh, well, a slightly belated welcome, and glad you're enjoying it, and I hope you've not been overawed by today and having to go to HQ, but we wish you well, and perhaps we'll see how you're getting on in a little while. You might come back and tell us how you're doing.
Yeah, no, I'd like to do that, Commissioner. Thank you.
Commissioner, perhaps if I just add a few words. I mean, we've been really pleased with the quality of Police Now candidates that we've attracted to the force. Alice is part of our second or third intake of Police Now recruits over the past 3 years. It's worth noting that a couple of officers who joined 3 years ago on the Police Now scheme are now applying for our fast track constable to inspector process, which is a national process, which is effectively the accelerated promotion scheme as was, that will project them through very early on in the service, the middle ranks of the service, with a view to them then pushing on and becoming future senior leaders. So we're very keen to maintain our links with Police Now. It's been a really successful method of attracting high quality candidates to the force alongside our own graduate entry scheme and alongside our apprentice scheme. It's had a broader, diverse range of candidates as well, which is absolutely welcome as we seek to make the force more representative of our communities. And it's also, particularly in the terms of detective now, so we've had a number of candidates join us, as Alice has joined us as a neighbourhood officers, others have joined us as fast-track detectives to go straight into the CID. And you're obviously well aware of some of the challenges we've got in terms of our detective workforce and capacity. So it sits alongside our broader recruitment profile, but we're really pleased with what we've seen so far. And as I say, we have some people now who have 2 or 3 years experience as a constable who are absolutely pushing on, and I'm sure we'll see them promoted and part of our leadership teams of the future.
That's very good. So no pressure there then, Alice, but inspector in 3 years. So thank you very much indeed, Alice. Thank you. Can I take you, Sarah, to page 22, the continuing interest we've got in residential burglaries, because as you well know, this is something that our communities are constantly talking to us about, and I'm pleased to see you devoted quite a bit of space in the report to that. I wanted to ask you, though, very specifically around ANPR coverage, that this seems to be really quite crucial, and perhaps, I don't know whether more so in the Barnsley district than elsewhere, but it comes up quite a bit. And I wondered whether, if you could say something around that. Do we have a strategy for ANPR? Do we know where it ought to be, cameras ought to be across South Yorkshire? Again, this may be Tim as much as yourself, but Sarah.
We certainly have an ANPR team, and I don't know the details of their strategy, Commissioner, if I'm honest. But we are working closely with the council, so BMBC, to make sure that we have particularly the arterial routes covered in terms of ANPR. And I've noted on here around our bid for the Safer Streets Fund, which is over in the Dearne, which has been heavily. It's a high crime area for us anyway. It's a super output area. It's one of the most socioeconomically deprived areas. And what we've done as part and parcel of that Safer Streets bid, which is with the two adjoining local authority areas, both Rotherham and Doncaster, is put in a bid for much greater ANPR coverage in that patch. So I'm hopeful that through the work we're doing and our ability to deploy mobile ANPR, that we do have coverage. It's also worth noting that some of our vehicles are equipped with ANPR. So when we have particular issues with cross-border crime, which we've had previously, not so much recently, but in previous years we've been particularly targeted around 2-in-1 burglaries, as you know, coming down from West Yorkshire in particular, down through Penistone. So we have deployed our road policing vehicles and had their support in tackling those issues, and they're equipped with ANPR. So I think we've got a mixed capability around ANPR, which is absolutely critical, because you don't want just static. You need the ability to that mobile camera facility in order to take it to those areas of greatest need.
Yeah, perhaps I could ask Tim whether there is anything that looks like a strategy. Have we got plans for where fixed cameras, that is, ought to be?
Commissioner, if I can assist. Yes, there is. Obviously, we don't advertise the locations of ANPR cameras, but they are deployed on the back of intelligence profiles from FIB.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Can I take you now to pages 23, 24? This is organised crime gangs is the theme here, Sarah. And you mentioned in, this is top of page 24, para 4.7. It's the second para down from the top. The day of action, OCG day of action. And I wonder if you could say a little bit around that, and something perhaps about the link between CCE and these gangs.
Okay, so it's not one day of action. We do a day of action every month. So what we do is we target, it's actually upgraded to 9 OCGs now, Commissioner. We've had another one mapped in the last few weeks. So we focus on each day of action on a particular OCG, and that's when we pull in together neighbourhood resources, district resources, and off OSS, so from our central force assets, to target a particular OCG on a day of action. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing else happens for the whole month. It's just a dedicated time where we can bring a lot of resources together to execute warrants where you need more assets to be available to you to do that. So that's been really positive for us over the last 6 months or so. So it's something we are maintaining and committed to doing. So those are the days of action. Sorry, what was your second question?
The link with child criminal exploitation. Yeah.
Yes, I don't want to say that we don't have that, because we may do, and we've had, certainly in the past, we've had a couple of children come to our attention that we believe have been involved in criminal exploitation, which is why we've got those processes embedded that I described earlier. And we were part and parcel of the EPIC programme, which was a local authority initiative, which was funded up until last March, end of last March, which introduced the CE tracker that gave us the basis upon which, and that really embedded holistic multi-agency response. So we benefited from that. In terms of actual children, we are seeing a little bit, but I don't think we're anything on the scale of Doncaster or Sheffield. I think our gang demographic is slightly different to those two districts, but we're very much aware of the need to have that intelligence picture, to speak to our young people that go missing, and really investigate using that CE tracker. Really investigate the root causes of those missing episodes, or their criminality. We certainly have had a couple of young people on the periphery, and we've had dedicated work done with those young people in line with the CE tracker and interventions that are put in place thereafter. But I don't consider it to be a major issue, but we're very much aware that it could come so.
Okay, thank you very much. I won't dwell on page 26 and speeding, only to say thank you for what you've put there, because again, this is an issue that people constantly talking to me about and emailing me about, and I think using social media in that way is very good, because it's a way in which you're getting across to the public that things are happening, and that acts as a deterrent as well as reassuring people. So thank you very much for that. I'm on page 27 now, though, which is tackling local priorities, rural and wildlife crime. In fact, it's probably over the page, and 28 as well. Operation Dunlins, which I think are now suspended because of coronavirus. I wonder if you could say whether you are intending to reinstate those, and I think you probably are towards the end of the year. And I wonder whether that was a bit late in the year. Is this post-harvest that we're talking about? Or?
There are reasons why, and I'm not an expert in rural crime, Commissioner, I've got to be honest, but there are reasons why they would all Dunlins that we've done previously, they do in March, April, pre the growth. Again, I'm going to show my complete ignorance of rural life. I apologise for that. But it is done strategically in line with the Farm Watch scheme that we have had running for the last few years. So there is that engagement with farmers and the rural community around when is best to do these operations, and it is March, April, and then post-harvest, so September, October. There is obviously a very strong reason why we do it in those two kind of key months of the year, rather than in the middle of summer when you risk trampling on crops, etc., etc. And I think there's something also to do with the wildlife, the seasons of the wildlife, and etc. So yes, there is a plan already, and it's a force-wide operation, so it's not Barnsley-centric, this, but we do have the intelligence officer who leads on wildlife crime, who sits in my intelligence unit. So he is responsible for that whole intelligence collection plan, a lot of the community messaging to the farming community, getting that information. And actually, I put in a good result at the bottom of the rural crime section of the 4.14, where we had some intelligence around egg collecting and prosecute an individual last year. We've also had an investigation into a poisoned peregrine falcon, which is progressing and has been widely publicised in NFU and various other kind of publications showing the community that we are active. Although the crime numbers are low, we are still dedicated and committed to dealing with this. Okay, thank you. Yes, the peregrine falcons need to get themselves to Wakefield Cathedral, don't they? That's the most secure place around, but thank you. On page 29, we're scuttling a little bit through the final parts of the report, but you talk about the IAGs, and again, I'd be grateful if you could just say a little bit about that, what's been happening during the lockdown period, and whether you've got a youth IAG. I think I saw some reference
to that. Is it page 30? Yes.
So we've had our IAG, and it's been, I would say, a very rock solid IAG for a number of years, with a really good, strong core group of individuals that represent different communities, not just in terms of underrepresented communities, but representing the geography and the variance in Barnsley, because we do have very affluent areas and very poor areas. And I think it's really important that we hear the voices from different communities, not only in terms of underrepresented groups, but also that kind of that socioeconomic divide that we know is very apparent, and their interactions and their lived experience of policing. So I think we've definitely got a good balance, although we still strive to increase our membership. We actually tragically have lost one of our members who passed away last month, which is a great shock to us all. But we work really hard with the IAG. We have a good, strong chair. They've continued to meet virtually throughout the last 12 months, so they've maintained that commitment despite the challenges of COVID. And what we found, and I led the IAG until I moved into this role, and now my superintendent Sheree Buttle leads it. What we found is that we're doing a lot to get younger people into that environment and give their views, because it's really important that we hear their voices. But for whatever reason, it just wasn't a conducive environment for retaining young people. So we launched the Youth IAG in February, got some really, really good representation. Again, even in that challenging period where we didn't have schools to go to, we still got really good representation. The next meeting of the Youth IAG is in May. They've already identified some of those key issues for us around hate crime, disability hate crime in particular. And actually some really positive results coming out of that engagement with young people, where they weren't only just telling us what they thought, they were volunteering crime and has experienced hate crime themselves, but is willing and keen to get involved in hopefully rehabilitation of offenders around hate crime. So really positive outcome from the Youth IAG, and a big commitment from them. And I'm grateful for that, because it's important we hear those voices.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be interested to see how that goes then, Sarah. I think that's everything I had questions on. I don't know whether there's anything you felt that you wanted to say that you haven't had an opportunity to say, or you may be happy with that. No,
I guess just in summary, it's as everybody knows, it's been a challenging 12 months, and I would just like to say I'm proud of the efforts that my officers and their commitment that they show every single day to serving the public and communities of Barnsley. There is a strong sense of pride and dedication to this town and all of its communities, and they deliver that every single day that they come to work, despite the challenges. And you know, I know there are difficulties. I know that we still have to improve, but their commitment to improving, giving me feedback on how we can improve, is again that testament to their commitment. And we do this all for the public.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Thank you. That's item whatever it was, item 10, the Forced Performance Report, Barnsley District. Thank you. Can we move to item 11 then, which is forced performance against the Police and Crime Plan? And this time we have these three priorities of the Police and Crime Plan, which are protecting vulnerable people, tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, treating people fairly. And this report addresses the tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. I'm not sure, is this Mark? Are you going to be speaking?
No, it'll be me, Commissioner.
Tim, okay. Well, again, if I can take you to one or two things rather than go through everything that's on the report, but thank you very much for the report. If I could begin with page 34. You talk there in paragraph 3.4 about the organisational risk assessment, which we talked about last time. And where have I lost it? Oh yes, paragraph 3.5. You talk about the makeup of the force now. You talk about a bottom-heavy force, which I presume does mean that you have a lot of relatively new, relatively inexperienced people. If you could just say a word around how that's managed, because I can see that really does present some issues for you in the next year or two?
Absolutely, it presents some challenges. Obviously, the force is growing. It's growing significantly, as you're aware, and we've discussed before. The challenge we have is to increase the size of the force and to manage natural wastage as people retire. Over a 3-year period, we'll be recruiting well in excess of 1,000 officers, which will leave a significant proportion of the workforce with limited experience. We're mitigating some of that by bringing people back on a 30-plus scheme, so bringing people back who've retired, often on a part-time basis, but we can do new flexible working patterns, job share, that's allowing us to ameliorate the effect of that inexperience. But probably the biggest investment is in effective tutoring and training of those new officers. We have to get new officers into the organisation, trained and equipped to be able to deal with a whole range of matters independently as quickly as possible. So we've launched a new tutor academy, invested in that through our People and Development branch. We've got a significant number of new tutors recruited on every borough to make sure that when people arrive out of training school that they have the very best experience as new officers as they find their way. And I think it's important to remember, and I say this very often when I'm talking to people who are tutors, policing is an experiential learning experience. You will go to a training school, and as Alice was saying earlier, you can learn the legislation out of a textbook or sat in a classroom. But the actual dynamics of dealing with people on the streets, managing some of the conflicts, managing some of the complexity that we come across on a day-by-day basis, it's an experiential learning experience, and you have to do it to understand it and be supervised. So that investment in tutors is absolutely critical to the future. The other thing is about the standard of recruits that we employ. And I talked earlier about the different streams of people coming in. We insist on really high standards, and we all take our turn. I'm doing a day next week of interviewing new recruits to make sure that the people who are coming through the door represent, one, the highest standard of candidate, but two, they've absolutely got the right values that fit with what we're trying to achieve as South Yorkshire Police. So what I'd say to you is it's a nice problem to have because the force is growing. It presents some challenges at how we flow people through the organisation, but we're absolutely up for it and really excited for the prospects of having a significant uplift in the force.
So it doesn't frighten them to death that an ACC is interviewing them then?
I don't think so. I think I'm I'm very nice with them, Alan. But I insist on high standards, as does everyone else. And we've all, I think even the Chief's done some recruiting interviews at some point during your tenure here. We do it because I think it's important to show leadership on these things. It's very often, well, also 81% of the budget goes on people. So getting the right people is absolutely critical. If we don't get people of the right standard, it becomes very, very difficult to get them to that standard once they're with us.
No, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Flying on through the report, page 35, the words there in 3.12, I think it's 3.12, just having a look. Data migration. I think I freeze every time I hear the words data migration. And I wonder if you could say something around this, the data migration project. How resilient all this is there backup? I mean, thinking of what happened nationally with the Police National Computer, the loss of data there, but could you say a little around that?
Well, first of all, in terms of our IS infrastructure, and if I get this wrong, I'm sure the DEP will correct me, we have new data centres, we have a backup data centre, and I know that the DEP, as the Senior Information Risk Owner, takes a very robust approach to information management and making sure that we've got the right level of security around our data. The data migration more broadly, though, is about some of our legacy systems. So you're obviously aware we invested in Connect as a new records management system. We've got Smart Contact as a call handling core system. You know that we're shortly to start investing in a digital asset management system to manage our digital evidence and other assets. What's really important that as we come to the end of those legacy systems, so CMS being our old crime management system, there are still a few active investigations. They're down to a handful. Making sure that that information that sits within that system, when it's migrated to the new system, is done in an efficient way, but most importantly that it's done accurately, because it's all very well engaging a significant uplift in police officers, but information and timely, accurate and available information is what makes police officers productive. So it's really important that when we get to the end of that data migration project, that we've got all our information in one place, but more importantly that information is accurate and that records are matched up to make sure that we can maximise the use of that data in our intelligence products and make sure that we use our resources more effectively.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether Mark wanted to add a comment or...
No, he's shaking his head.
Shaking, okay, right, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I move you, Tim, to page 36 and 3.21? This is talking about planning data derived from or with the 4 local authorities about future housing developments, that sort of thing. I wonder if you could say something about the work of the DOCOs, the designing out crime officers, whether they're routinely involved with the planning of new housing developments across South Yorkshire, and if they're not, whether they should be.
I can answer that.
Can you answer that? You'd be better placed.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. One of the really important parts, actually, to legislation that supports planning applications is that we actually do have a statutory toehold in planning applications, i.e. it is a statutory obligation on behalf of developers and planning authorities to have regard to the advice of DOCOs. That is a very precious opportunity, of course, that we have. It means that we need to discharge our responsibilities in that way, professionally and expeditiously and all the rest of it, so as not to create unnecessary and unwelcome bureaucracy. But what it does enable us to do, and we do it, is to make sure that where applications are granted, that they are granted and incorporate the very best of secure by design products, whether that be windows, doors, locks, etc. And whilst on the one hand it sounds like fairly dry rations, on the other, the empirical evidence of the effectiveness of this approach is huge. So there are studies that have shown that if you compare one new housing estate built to secure by design standards versus another that is not, one is about 87% less likely to be afflicted with crime than the other. And as a result, we're very committed to that. And as you know, of course, Alan and I lead for crime prevention nationally, and so we design the standards, if you like, for the DOCO function, and our people therefore represent, the best of standards in class, really. So it's a really important part of the business.
And that's a very significant figure, isn't it, for the ability to design crime out at that early stage. And in South Yorkshire, we have all the cooperation we need.
Yes, we do. We have a very, very willing set of partners. I think everybody recognises the real benefit of getting this stuff done well and properly right from the outset.
Thank you. I'm on now, Tim, to page 38, and this is probably about para 3.31, I think, or several of those paras anyway, about professional development. And I just wonder, clearly very important to all this, I just wonder whether you're able to design enough time in to officers' days in order for them to do this CPD.
The answer to that, the simple answer to that, Commissioner, is that we'll make time, because having properly trained, accredited police officers is critical to delivery of the business. Earlier on in the report, I talked about the neighbourhood policing skills course that we've developed. We're only the second force in the country to develop that. It's accredited by Skills for Justice. I think it might be featuring in a couple of forces in the Northwest in the forthcoming year. But it really is a significant investment in our neighbourhood officers to give them the skills and capabilities to be able to deliver the very best neighbourhood policing. Of interest, we're just starting to develop now a Sergeant's Technical Skills course, and it follows really from the point that I made earlier about having a lot of young officers. It naturally follows that we will inevitably have quite a lot of young sergeants. Well, if I go back to when I was a sergeant 20 years ago, it was relatively rare to have a sergeant with 3 or 4 years service. That will be far more common in years to come. So we're developing a technical skills course for sergeants that will look like an initial course followed by a programme of continuing professional development over a 12-month period to make sure that we've got the skills and abilities to be able to supervise people properly. So, as I said, that's the long answer. The short answer is that we will make time and make sure that we work around that.
Yeah, very good. You must have been a teenager, Tim, when you were a sergeant.
Yeah, I was a fairly young sergeant, but no longer, I'm afraid.
Okay, on to page 39. Just a puzzle I've got, as I've been reading both the Barnsley report and this report. They seem to be suggesting that crime was down and demand was up. And I just wondered if you could square the circle for me a bit.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to bear in mind, Alan, is that crime and disorder amounts to about 30% of all the calls for service we get. And it's a point that should never be lost on the public and on legislators. Missing children, calls about concern for welfare, all of these things add up to the demand, particularly on our frontline response teams. So we've actually seen, as you say, we've seen recorded crime drop, and in some cases drop pretty significantly as a result of COVID. But people still call us, and they call us for a whole variety of reasons. And certainly in the last couple of weeks, we've seen an uptick in that as the weather's got better.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the public do think you spend all your day on crime, and how we educate the public, I think, is a continuing battle around some of these issues. But yeah, thanks.
But what I'd say is that's why the importance of neighbourhood policing to deal with, problem solving around persistent missing people is really important. The interaction and partnership with mental health services around how we quickly and easily and efficiently manage the calls and demand around mental health. These are really important aspects of our business, and that's the reason we put such effort into them.
Yeah. Now, I had someone who got in touch with me following the precept increase, saying, I don't mind paying the extra precept as long as the police do what I want them to do, i.e. solve crime. And no concept of, what you do actually spend quite a lot of your time doing and around.
Yeah. Thank you.
On page 40, this is paragraph 342, fraud and a growing area of crime. And you talk there about the force has 2 fraud prevention officers. And I just wonder how that was going and whether you felt that was enough, something around that.
So in the last, I suppose, 18 months to 2 years, we've put quite a lot of effort into fraud. It amounts to a huge proportion of all crime now, particularly online fraud, but not exclusively. But the majority of it involves internet crime. And it is a simple fact of the matter is you cannot enforce your way out of fraud. Very often there's an international element that the perpetrators might be in another country. It's all online. So having a proper targeted preventative programme is really, really important to work out who's most vulnerable, who's been a victim and likely to become a repeat victim. And we do that through our crime support hub, analysing all the reports that we get and all the reports that come to us through the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau within the City of London Police. And we run them through a matrix to identify those victims who are most vulnerable. And we do that even in cases where responsibility for investigation of the crime doesn't actually sit within South Yorkshire Police. The role of the City of London Police is to coordinate for all investigations. So they will decide which force is the most effective one to actually conduct the investigation. But if we've got vulnerable victims sat within South Yorkshire, through the process that we run in the Crime Support Hub, we identify them and we can then go out and actually provide really targeted specialist advice to prevent them becoming victims again. We've just recently had HMIC revisit on fraud. I think we consider ourselves to be in a pretty strong place now in terms of the way that we manage that and the way that we make sure that we are not only looking at the investigations that are reported here, but also victims where the actual perpetrator and the actual offending behaviour takes place elsewhere.
Thank you. Finally, on page 41, finally for me, 41 probably over into 42, the integrated offender management, the strategies here and what's happening here. You talk about a new strategy, and I can see the trickiness of getting the balance right here. This is paragraph 3.51. I just wonder if you could say something that doesn't frighten us all to death around that a little bit, and something around the management of sex offenders. Would it be true to say that low-level sex offenders are still being managed by, or perhaps they never were, by neighbourhood teams? What's been happening around that?
If I deal with the IOM first, Alan, I think we obviously have a cohort of offenders that we have within integrated offender management. If I was to wind the clock back 10 years, you would have probably found almost all that cohort to be serious inquisitive crime offenders. There was then a shift very much around vulnerability, and you potentially have serial domestic abuse offenders in there. And in the meanwhile, then you've got people involved in organised crime. What we're trying to do with the new strategy is make sure that we've got the right balance between different areas of offending. So it's a shift in emphasis, and you can see how it's laid out in the report in terms of how that manifests itself. In terms of sex offenders, we did at one stage about 3 years ago look to put low-risk sex offenders managed by neighbourhood teams, but we've moved away from that now. We've actually made an extra investment into our advisor teams to cope with that. But we felt on balance that it was better dealt with by specialist officers, and that we could manage that work more effectively with a smaller group of people.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, thank you. I think that's all the questions I had, Tim, on the report. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to draw to my attention that you felt you needed to do, or that you're happy with that.
I think probably just a couple of points from page 44 and page 45, if I may.
Yes.
Firstly, just to emphasise some of the stuff we're doing around CPD, around our officers and improving outcomes. We're very keen to continue to develop our investigative capability at all levels. So we're making use of a new bite-sized video platform now, where we have very short training videos that are available to our officers. We're exploring opportunities now to make those available on mobile phone devices in a secure way, all of which will contribute to that effort of making our officers more effective at investigation and giving them a higher skill level as they go about their business. And then finally, the only point I wanted to just touch on was the success of the armed crime team. It still remains the case that when we have a firearms discharge, it causes fear within the community. And you'll recall that our response in the early part of last year was to create an armed crime team under Detective Superintendent Ian Proffitt. That's been a real success story for us, and the impact that they're having is really significant. They're accompanied by our specialist firearms support to be able to deal with some of these offenders and to deal with them safely. And you can see that we've recovered, during 2020, we recovered 66 illegally held firearms, and that's a 32% increase on 2018. We're really pleased with that. That has an impact. That is guns that are in the hands of criminals that are no longer in the hands of criminals. So we'll continue to develop that and continue to make sure that brings pressure to bear on those people who are causing absolute misery on our streets.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was in the Arbourthorne Manor area of the city the other day, and they were talking about, incidents, recent incidents of the last few years, which did cause panic there. I have a friend who lives in the United States of America, and I was talking to him about this report and saying that you'd recovered these 66 firearms, the final part of your report here, and he said, "Ye gods, how lucky we are that they reckon every house has got 66 firearms in it down the street on which he lives." So this is not the kind of society we want to live in. So thank you for that. Thank you to the Armed Crimes team. Thanks very much, Tim. I think that's everything on item 11 then. So if we go to the Chief Executive's reporting, now Michelle is not here, but we have the OPCC delivery plan, which is item 12, pages 47 to 48. Sophie, are you saying something around these? I'm not sure there's much to say, to be honest. But
there is a Commissioner, but very briefly, this is a request for a departure from normal process. At this time of year, we normally ask that the delivery plan, there is a new delivery plan annually, that it's approved, one for South Yorkshire Police and one for the OPCC. Because of the PCC elections that are coming up in May, we've had an addendum to the police and crime plan, and although the priorities have essentially remained the same, paragraph 3.4 of the report shows the areas of focus in the addendum to the police and crime plan. The existing delivery plan support those areas of focus, so we're just asking for formal consent from you, our approval, that we can continue to use the same delivery plan until a new police and crime plan comes into being after the election.
Yeah, okay, very happy to formally approve that then, Sophie.
Thank you.
Just for the benefit of councillor colleagues, you probably heard that all electioneering is suspended now for the duration, well, for a time, because of the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. So I don't quite know what that means for all of us, but it means you've got your Saturday back if no. And then, which is JIAC report. You can see you're on.
I can be very brief, Alan. It's a fairly long report, which reflects a really long meeting. As always, we're looking to give assurance to think that things are operating as they should do. We always receive updates from the PCC and the force, which are obviously at a point in time, so expire quite quickly afterwards, but it does set the context for the meeting. Internal audits up to speed, and Jack have taken part in consultation for next year's internal audit plan. I felt it was important at this time that as an audit committee we understood that contingencies that were put in place as a result of us leaving the European Union were operating as expected, and gave us assurance that the force were in the best position that they could be. Risk management's going according to plan, and we got updates on budget setting that came to PAB last time, and treasury management, where 2 or 3 of us felt that we needed some further training, which Sophie's arranging for us. So other than that, I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got any.
Thank you. Well, I was at the meeting. Are there any questions from anyone? If not, I think we just need to thank you, Steve, for the JIAC report by exception. And then item 14 is the Independent Ethics Panel. Again, it's an exception report. I see Anne McCaskill is here. Anne, I don't know whether there's anything you want to say to that.
No, I think it's all very clear. Since this report was done, we had a meeting with you, Commissioner, and we have actually we're in the process of starting to do some of this work, really in response to the uplift of officer numbers and the next round of recruitment. So we're at the stage of planning, having a kind of a look at the recruitment process and look at data from other areas to see how well, try to compare South Yorkshire with similar areas and to see how well they're managing to recruit from minority communities.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And it's a very different panel now, a very interesting panel. So we hope we can get back to meeting around a table again soon, because that'll make a huge difference to things. But thank you for that. Item 15 then is PCC decisions. This is pages 61 to 64. Didn't realise they'd taken quite so many. Sophie, is there anything you want to say around that?
Sorry, Commissioner, I was having difficulty getting my video on there. I don't think so. All the decisions are listed out there. They're all in line with your statutory functions. Like you said, there have been a number of decisions that have been made this last period. But I think the report itself is fairly self-explanatory, unless you have any specific questions.
Okay. No, I've got no questions there, so that's fine. Thank you very much. So finally then, any other business? There can't be because none has been notified to us. Date and time, the next meeting is 10th of June. Well, by then, quite a number of things will have happened. We'll have said goodbye to Mark Roberts, off to Cheshire. All the best for that, Mark, and of course the Chief to Greater Manchester. So things will be very different next time we meet in June. There'll be PCC elections, so I hope to see you all again. If I don't, then I do thank you all for the contributions you've made at PAB over this time. Really good meetings, very grateful to you all, but I do hope to see you in June. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Oh, and thank you very much to Alice, for that's a brave thing to have to do when you're so new in the force. Thanks, everyone.